The Canadian federal election is Monday, October 21st, so I'm going to present to you some of the most important need-to-know information about the various platforms and candidates. Before the last election, I made a video on my YouTube channel that detailed possible scenarios under each party's rule, mostly with respect to the economic impacts, but this time I will widen the horizon into other areas. For the Liberals, I outlined more deficit spending, leading to a lower Canadian dollar, a boost to marijuana stocks in anticipation of legalization, a boost to infrastructure spending, which would likely benefit that sector, and a general increase overall in Canadian markets. All of these predictions came true to various extents, with the marijuana stocks increasing in the 2,000 to 5,000% range, even for the largest, highest priced stocks, then giving a significant portion of that back recently with massive volatility all the while. Because, as I expected, it continues to be a money-losing endeavor for all companies and governments. However, they still remain many multiples above those 2015 levels. The infrastructure stocks and sector had an initial large spike, then also pulled back as the promised Canadian Infrastructure Bank proved to be just another inefficient election promise that in the end amounted to basically nothing. And we've had the whole SNC-Lavalin scandal taken to a whole new level. But infrastructure and construction companies have been pulling in strong profits overall. The deficits turned out to be much larger than expected and are continuing with no end in sight, so the Canadian dollar did fall as predicted versus the US dollar, but also has come back somewhat as US trade tensions and other political uncertainties keep a ceiling on their dollar. Finally, overall markets have moved up as expected, although the performance has lagged other major markets such as the US. Now, on to this year's election and the possible ramifications. Again, like the last election, a minority government is expected, as the polls are as close as they have ever been going into an election. Although, as we know from the last election, that is no guarantee, as third place in the polls not long before ended up winning a majority in 2015. A majority will obviously result in greater ability to deliver campaign promises, well, that will be more difficult with a minority. A minority probably isn't a bad thing with the current crop of leaders and all of their voter-targeted promises that are often much better in theory than in practice. I have focused my attentions on some of the major platform promises of the four largest political parties based on current polling, with no intended offense to any party or issue. But these are the issues and the parties predicted to have the greatest election influence Canada-wide. First of all, let's look at the budget promises. The Liberals are planning more deficits indefinitely, with the goal of maintaining Canada's AAA credit rating and lowering the debt-to-GDP ratio. As Ontario knows, with many years of Liberal deficits, a rating downgrade is inevitable, and even the outlook was only raised back to stable with a AA negative rating after what many would consider a harsh budget aimed at cutbacks under Premier Ford. The NDP has similar policy of lowering the debt-to-GDP ratio over the next 10 years. Lowering the debt-to-GDP ratio puts a positive spin on more debt, but what happens when GDP stagnates or goes down, which is expected to happen sooner rather than later with the next recession predicted any time now, after over a decade of solid growth since the last one. Then, when interest rates go up, the cost of debt increases as well. We are already paying $26 billion a year just in interest on our debt. Think how much more we could do with our budgets without that cost every year, when most of the major election promises were costed at most at a few $1 billion a year. The time to balance or reduce the debt was during this past 10-year growth period, and when things do get worse, the debt and deficits will have to go up from an already high level. The Conservatives plan to have a budget surplus in 5 years, while the Greens say they will balance the budget in that time by 2024. Both of which I would have to say in theory are clear-cut better targets than the Liberal and NDP plans. On to taxes. The Liberals are promising to raise the basic personal exemption limit over the next 4 years to $15,000, which would benefit all taxpayers and on average Canadians would save $292 per year in taxes. They are also including a 10% tax on luxury items over $100,000, such as boats and cars. An interesting idea. Now, will Trudeau actually himself pay out of pocket for this, or is he just going to send the taxpayers a bill or conveniently leave these luxury items out of his taxes, like his finance minister, Bill Morneau, did? Meanwhile, the Conservatives would lower the tax rate on taxable income up to $47,630 to 13.75% from 15%, which would benefit any Canadian income taxpayer and save the average taxpayer about $444 per year. In addition, tax-free maternity and paternity leaves, increased Canada Child Benefit during the first year of a child's life, and increasing OAS and CPP survivor benefits would all be helpful at some of the lower income times in the lives of Canadians for the Liberals. In comparison to tax credits on maternity and paternity leaves, in addition to bringing children's fitness tax credit and art credits, these are also positives in those situations to encourage health and culture in our country for the Conservatives. Both the frontrunners are making very similar promises here, as tax cuts and credits are always pleasing to voters. Who doesn't want more money in their pocket? But with massive deficits and tough economic times being signaled, it may not be the right time for them. At the other end of the political spectrum, the NDP is looking to add a 1% wealth tax on fortunes above $20 million, to increase the amount of capital gains subject to tax from 50% to 75%, to raise the top marginal tax rate 2% for those earning $210,000, and to raise corporate taxes. The Greens want to increase corporate taxes, place a tax on robots taking human jobs, and a tax on financial transactions of 0.5%, which would have astronomical effects on financial markets. Increasing tax on the wealthy is always an easy target for any left-leaning party, although as always it works better in theory than practice, because the wealthier a person is, the more resources and options they have to find ways to reduce their tax bill. As for some of the more radical proposals, I know some of these ideas come from people with no basic economic knowledge, who will never actually get into power, but you'd think someone in their inner circles would be able to pass on the common sense ramifications that these taxes on our financial markets and economy would be devastating and destroy a lot of wealth, not just for the wealthy, but for all of us who have savings, investments, or vested interests in pension plans. The Canada Pension Plan Investment Board manages over $400 billion. Think of what a 0.5% tax on every single transaction would do to it. And this would literally hurt every single Canadian. Plus a 5% tax on bank profits, which are by far the greatest and most important component of our Canadian equity markets. Trying to increase the CPP target replacement rate while crushing the value of investments it holds is quite counterintuitive. Everyone is offering some goodies for students. The Liberals want to increase post-secondary grants $1,200, but many are asking why there has been nothing done for students over the last 4-year term. The Conservatives want to increase the government contributions to RESPs from 20% to 30%, up to $2,500 of government money per year. A modest help when saving for your children's education. The NDP would cancel all interest on current and future student loans, and the Greens want to make college and university tuition free and to forgive student debt held by government, which are much more ambitious. Making post-secondary education more affordable is necessary, as their costs have risen disproportionately high relative to overall inflation, and this is an area interest-free loans make sense, in my opinion. But going to the point of free education would likely not be wise. Many European countries have free education, or close to it, and when combined with struggling economies, this has led to a well-educated, discouraged, overqualified workforce with astonishingly high youth unemployment in the range of 50% across many regions. Furthermore, finding a job in their field of study is even more unlikely, So most have spent many years gaining an education that they cannot use instead of going straight for areas of demand in the workforce. Also, schools here in North America are being run as businesses, taking in as many students as they can from all over the world, not even just at the post-secondary level, but at the high school level, not for the betterment of society, but in the financial and reputational interests of the institutions. We've already seen many specific job markets get flooded with graduates unable to find jobs, and should unlimited government funding come into play, you can guarantee these institutions would be pushing to raise their enrollments as much as possible, packing all classrooms with no regard for the students' actual learning and best prospects after graduation. I like the idea of a tax on multinational tech giants, and it is one area all of the major political parties agree upon, even if it will make all that technology more expensive. I'm not sure if this would negate the advantages of Netflix, Uber, Airbnb, Amazon, and so many others, or just prove unnoticeable to the average consumer. It's hard to predict, but they should be contributing something back to our Canadian economy if they are going to be taking so much of our hard-earned money. On to energy and environment. We all know Trudeau is forcing the carbon tax on all provinces, which many are fighting, and which Scheer wants to do away with. This is a tough one, to be honest. We are small on the global stage, but that is still not an excuse not to do our own part. It's hard, though, to attack the average Canadian heating their home or driving to work, while our leaders and all those Hollywood activists are flying around in their private jets and driving with multi-vehicle escorts. Even livestock produces estimates of between 20 to 50% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. So if people are serious about being emission-free, does that mean we are going to commit mass animal genocide? Let's be realistic, people. It is all about a balance and a shift in the right direction. It cannot be overnight and does not have to be that way. Even Saudi Arabia, the wealthiest country in the world off oil reserves, is trying to monetize those reserves now while they can with the Saudi Aramco IPO, so they can use that wealth to diversify into other areas. Canada should be following a similar model. We financially cannot suddenly shut down the oil sands. It would kill our entire economy, and we'd be buying energy at higher prices from foreign countries. We should be self-sustaining off our own energy resources while also sharing these resources with others while they still have some value, and using the proceeds to replace these resources with renewable alternatives. The electric car and energy-saving home renovation incentives are nice starts, but still not what they should be. The Liberals are offering interest-free loans up to $40,000 to renovate homes to make them more energy efficient. I don't like this one and would fear it could end up being similar to the interest-free first-time home buyer incentive, which they then take an equity interest in your home. So a backdoor way to actually get a return on their money without calling it interest. Besides, increasing our already high household debt levels is not something that should be encouraged at this time of the economic cycle. They're planting 2 billion trees and using the revenues from the Trans Mountain Pipeline to promote clean energy technology. Sound nice on paper, but tracking the amount of trees and where specific revenue is going are not things we Canadians can really hold the government accountable for. And his track record on getting pipelines constructed in the first place has proven to be non-existent over his 4 years in office. So there is no way to know if and when these revenues would actually come to fruition. Banning single-use plastics by 2021 is frankly not likely to happen. He couldn't even answer a simple question of one thing that his family does to help fight climate change. The most hilarious thing about this is that they are trying to follow the Europeans in banning single-use plastics. And I have never seen so much plastic waste as in Europe. Every meal is eaten on plastic plates with plastic cutlery, and they change these plastic plates and cutlery between courses. It's great for politicians to make a bunch of promises from their ivory chairs, but most of the people grabbing a quick bite to eat on their lunch, or having a large gathering in the countryside, or just a big meal in their home and not having the luxury of a dishwasher, are nowhere near removing one-use plastics from their lives at this point. For the Conservatives, a 20% tax credit for energy-saving home renovations from $1,000 to $20,000 to a maximum of $3,800. A bit of tax savings for people already considering these energy-efficient moves, but this wouldn't be enough incentive to encourage most Canadians. As a comparison, in Europe, some of the same tax credits cover 50 to 65% of the costs through tax credits, as opposed to the 20% proposed here for energy-efficient upgrades. Reintroducing the tax credit for public transit passes is a nice, environmentally friendly addition for the lowest income Canadians. Public transit has gotten much too expensive recently, and if we really want to be serious about cutting down on vehicle emissions, the public transit system has to be made more affordable and be improved. Sure, in Toronto you can get around easily by public transport, but almost everywhere else in Canada it is a nightmare, and most avoid it at all costs. The NDP are joining in on the single-use plastics ban, but their more reasonable and efficient policy here is to make all public transit fleets electric, which I think is a fantastic way to lead by example. And we do have some electric bus manufacturers in Canada that could also benefit. The Greens are a little less ambitious with electric vehicles just for Canada Post, but they would like all vehicles in Canada electric by 2030, and are probably the party with the greatest chance at achieving their zero greenhouse gas emissions target by 2050. Mandating energy retrofits for all buildings by 2030 is a bit absurd though. Are they going to pay for every Canadian building to be retrofit? Because I don't know too many of us who have the money for that or would be willing to dish out that much even if we did. I'd love to run my home completely on renewable power, but as I've mentioned before, our incentives are pathetic compared to other areas of the world, and like most Canadians, I wouldn't fit such a massive bill on my own. Plus, our climate makes some renewables, such as solar, much less efficient. I personally inquired into incentives for retrofitting my home or getting more energy-efficient appliances, and you know what I received from our current government? A surge protector with a built-in timer, a couple of light bulbs, and a pamphlet. Hardly going to change the world with that. For housing, the Liberals are making the first-time homebuyer incentive more accessible for those in high-priced cities like Toronto and Vancouver, which may prove helpful for some first-time homebuyers in these cities, but that applies to a very small segment of the Canadian population. Increasing the RRSP withdrawal limit under the first-time homebuyers plan to $35,000 from $25,000 is long overdue, but again, it's just a lot of smoke and mirrors letting you use some of your own money that you have to put back into your RSP, so you're not getting taxed until your actual retirement. A lot of first-time homebuyers don't have $35,000 in RRSPs to take out in the first place, and might find it hard to put that money back in over time after they've got a mortgage, and considering the high cost of living and low saving rates Canadians are living with right now. For the Conservatives, bringing back 30-year mortgages and reviewing the mortgage stress tests will both reduce mortgage payments and increase mortgage approvals, which can benefit any mortgage holder, not just first-time homebuyers in high-priced cities. But this could push up existing home prices that the Liberal government has been trying to cool down, which actually benefits existing homeowners on paper more than it would benefit new home buyers. The NDP also want to bring back 30-year mortgages while creating 500,000 affordable housing units and offering $5,000 rental subsidies. They would also like a 15% tax on foreign buyers that would likely decrease home prices in some of the more inflated cities. The Green Party wants to eliminate the first-time homebuyers incentive and to introduce tax incentives for purpose-built housing. These two parties appear to be gearing their housing policies more towards affordable rent as opposed to the home ownership of the Liberals and Conservatives. And many will make the case for renting being a better option than home ownership with current housing valuations. But unless there are reasonable profits available for the private sector, this does put a greater onus on government to build and maintain these rental units. Finally, for healthcare, the Liberals want to invest $6 billion over 4 years to improve healthcare services. The Conservatives want to invest $1.5 billion for new medical imaging, while the NDP and Green Party both want national pharmacare next year. Since healthcare is a provincial issue, this is not as much of a hot-button topic, but anything that can be done to reduce wait times and improve service would be greatly welcomed by all Canadians, while those without coverage could obviously benefit greatly from pharmacare. A key thing to remember for any election is that you are voting for a person, not a political party. Too many people today attach themselves to a political party for life, no matter who is running, and this is a problem with our democracy. Everyone has different values and beliefs, and it is normal to have discrepancies between yours and any other person or party. They all have strengths and weaknesses, and we all have to recognize that the parties and policies are only as strong as their leaders. First of all, Justin Trudeau is obviously an easy target after a term in office filled with many faux pas. A self-proclaimed feminist for Indigenous rights covered up the SNC scandal to keep votes in his home province of Quebec, and then reprimanded a female Indigenous cabinet member who stood up to him in the face of constant illegal pressure. If that's not showing his true colors, I don't know what is. But then out comes repeated blackface incidents, which in one instance would be one thing, but this was a repeated mocking that he says he cannot even quantify definitively how many times he has done it. Even as an adult and teacher, on a public stage in front of an entire school, and using banana props. Not even his clueless trust fund upbringing can deny that the inappropriateness is and always was obvious. And one incident could maybe be easily forgiven, but when it becomes a regular occurrence, any chance he had to dress up as a young adult, that is a more serious issue. He's an elitist, fake champion of the middle class, and climate activist spending government money lavishly to excess while traveling with 2 planes for his campaign, unable to answer a simple question to explain how his family fights climate change, instead coming up with the famous stuttered drink box water bottle things response.
And what do you and your family do to cut back on plastics?
We have recently switched to drinking water bottles out of water out of when we have water bottles out of a plastic. Away from plastic towards paper. Like drink box water bottles, sort of things. There's a number of choices we can make as consumers.
Maintaining Liberal candidates after racist and sexist remarks, and a finance minister who omitted his French villa from his taxes. It is so hard for us middle-class individuals to keep all our foreign corporations and villas straight. Shows how in touch he actually is with the average Canadian. Trudeau could make a bit of history here, as since 1935, no party has come into power with a majority under a new leader, served one full term, then lost power in the next election. Oddly, the only other time we had such short-term political shifts was with his father, when after 3 terms in office, lost power for a brief year, then regained it for a 4th term before losing power once again to Mulroney, who won the most seats in Canadian history. This shows how unimpressed Canadians are with Justin to see his support go from majority to possibly a loss in 1 term. Andrew Scheer would be the next most scrutinized leader, not disclosing his U.S. father and citizenship, saying he was an insurance broker when it appears he left the insurance office before the licensing process was finalized, are some recent talking points. To be honest, minor offenses when compared to Trudeau's hidings and illegal political interference, but discrepancies nonetheless that the media and opposing voters will try to cling to. He was likely chosen because, as essentially a career politician, his background is somewhat vetted, and his youthfulness was a conservative answer to Trudeau's pretty boy image. Substance is what matters with all candidates, and he often comes off robotic in his answers, repeating his campaign slogans in response to almost every question he receives. Slogans are fine, and we all know politicians love to slide them in, but when some of his numbers are challenged, such as a savings with reducing foreign aid 25%, which many people are obviously criticizing, you need more content and less repetitiveness in your answers. In theory, most people would be fine with reducing or eliminating aid to dictatorships and oppressive regimes like North Korea, and we should stop buying so much energy from Middle East countries with horrible women's rights and human rights records, making them some of the richest nations on the planet. However, some of the foreign aid that does go to better off countries goes during their times of need. The one example presented recently in an article challenging his numbers brought up aid to Italy after their series of devastating earthquakes. Italy is less financially well off than Canada, but still a developed country with a high standard of living. But many countries much worse off than Canada offered aid and service to combat our numerous western wildfires. So are we now creating an artificial cutoff to decide who can get help and who cannot? In the end, I highly doubt our foreign aid budget will change that much or present any meaningful savings. But this is one area where he has been criticized, and one of many examples where instead of giving definitive answers to questions, he has instead revolved his answers around campaign slogans, instead of more substantial explanations of his policies or reasoning as to why he is worthy of our votes.
So this is a very clear choice of selection between Justin Trudeau's record on foreign policy and on foreign aid. And Canadians now can see the choice that between sending more of their hard-earned tax dollars to countries that rank relatively high on the development index, countries like Italy, like Brazil, like Turkey, and hostile governments like Iran. Justin Trudeau has made his choice. I have made my choice. We will redirect that money here at home to help Canadians get ahead.
Jagmeet Singh has grown up with the challenges of racism and immigrant parents struggling to make a living, and on the campaign trail he has put forth a positive image for the most part. His father was a physician who first required recertification in Canada, and his mother worked at a bank. Then Singh himself worked as a criminal defense lawyer out of school. So even though in this elite group he has probably had the most challenging upbringing, he still is far from knowing the true struggles of many around the world living in true poverty. Although at times he can talk a decent game, on numerous occasions he has stumbled over simple questions, showing what appears to be inattentiveness or a lack of understanding. Like when asked about the Canadians detained in China and he went straight onto a tangent about the Trump administration, or when he could not answer his caucus's position from the meeting he had just been in and had to ask another NDP parliamentary leader.
Gun bills, I haven't understand your answer. Like, is your caucus behind you on this bill to support the bill?
Right, on this bill, our critic is Matthew Dubé. Yeah, and so he's provided a way forward in terms of our position on the bill. The principles will always remain. We want to create a safe country and make sure that we have laws that increase safety, and we've said that this, as it stands right now, this is something that does address issues of safety.
Caucus agrees with you supporting that bill.
Right now, this is something that our porte-parole, Mathieu Dubé, has responded to and has made it.
Can you tell us whether or not your caucus is behind you in supporting this bill?
At this point, that's I'm. You know, just give me a moment. I have to clarify. Yeah. So yes, right now our caucus is in support of this bill.
Finally, Elizabeth May and the Greens are seen less on the public stage and therefore not as closely scrutinized. We do know, however, that she was born in the US, oddly not coming up much in this election campaign, where Scheer's American father started making a lot of headlines. Born in Connecticut to an accountant father and sculptor-writer mother, who later owned a small business where she worked on the East Coast when they came to Canada. Her nearly 10-minute seemingly drunken speech filled with the F-word and criticisms of her political foes showed me enough to know that she does not possess the qualities or abilities to be the leader of a country. But we all know that will not happen anyway, so her role will remain as a climate activist leader from a growing party.
Omar Khadr, you got more class than the whole cabinet. Thank you.
All right. Glenn, that was Lisa Raitt.
Yeah.
Kind of. Well, what's going on there?
Well, she gave a speech that was a very aggressive, partisan speech in denouncing the government and its treatment of Omar Khadr. And Lisa Raitt, a Conservative cabinet minister, a transport minister, is basically shooing her off the stage because at that point it had gone on so long and it become so uncomfortable and completely contrary to the tone that these things are supposed to have.
Personally, I think our entire political system is flawed. We have too many political parties trying to adhere to core values, and people vote only with political allegiances and personal interests in mind, rather than for the best candidate in their individual riding and for the common good of all of Canada. Unfortunately, their representatives are essentially forced to vote with their party on all matters anyways, effectively eliminating the entire democratic value of our system. No one individual has all of the exact same beliefs and values as anyone else, so acting as such is inhumane. Being a liberal, conservative, NDP, Green, or other does not define who you are or mean you have to agree with all of their policies, which in the end can be quite similar even across feuding parties that like to believe themselves superior and irreparably different. The change we need, I think, is in our entire political system. Forget about political parties and traditional views, and let us all just analyze each issue and individual on a case-by-case basis, and elect officials who we can trust to use their intelligence, common sense, and support from their constituents to do what they think is best for the people that they represent. Thank you for watching. Please share this video and make your voice heard on October 21st, even if that is just by spoiling your ballot to show dissatisfaction with our current candidates. For more, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or you can check out my website.